Hi, my name's Paul Koch, and today I'd like to show you how I created a swarmatron-inspired Kontakt instrument out of acoustic folk instruments, and it's free. Recently I created the Swarmitar and the swarminet, a couple of free Kontakt instruments that you can download in the link in the description. They're based on the swarmatron, where you can take a bunch of notes played in unison and spread them apart in pitch and back again with a CC control. And today I'd like to show you the acoustic swarmitar. Instead of electric guitars and clarinets, I'm going to use one of these, another one, this guy, this thing, and this mystery box that my lovely fiance got for me. But first, let's jump to the future so you can see the final product, then we can jump back here and I'll show you how I made it. You ever record yourself doing something and then you realize after like 25 minutes that you didn't actually hit record? That's never happened to me. The acoustic swarmitar. Here we go. I'm actually very pleased with how this came out. It was a little iffy for a little while when I was hearing the raw recordings, but I think it turned out great. At its core, the acoustic swarmitar is a collection of acoustic and folk instruments that you can then spread apart and pitch like a swarmatron using this swarm knob. So before I say too much, let's just hear what it sounds like. So I'll walk you through what's in here. Start from left to right. We've got a Gibson J45 acoustic guitar. We've got this Fender high-strung guitar. I don't know the model, but it's something cheap. A 5-string banjo, a mandolin, a Marxophone, and a DIY cardboard dulcimer that costs $59. I'll link it down below if you want to check it out. It's a super easy build. You just need some glue and sandpaper. Actually pretty cool. It sounds really nice and it was dirt cheap, so I recommend it. So here's the Gibson J45 by itself. The high-strung guitar by itself. And the banjo. Oh, the banjo. I really tried to make this sound good, and I don't know if it got there. It definitely has some weird sounds in it, but as an effect, it can be very cool. Hear all that? It sounds like it's being played like inside of a dinosaur. As an effect, very cool, but I've found myself in playing around with this, turning it off more often than not, but I'm giving it to you anyway. Here's the mandolin. The Marxophone. I don't know if you can see it back there, but it's being held together by clamps because the body is totally split apart. And then here's the dulcimer. Now, if you've played around with any of my swarm instruments before, you'll notice one thing is different other than the paint job is this 12-string mode. So what that'll do is that'll turn the combination of the high-strung guitar and the Gibson into basically a 12-string guitar. If you're not familiar with high-strung guitars, it's also called Nashville tuning. The bottom 4 strings, the E, A, D, G, are just tuned an octave up. Another way to think of it is like with a 12-string guitar, where there's 6 sets of 2 strings called courses, and the lower 4, the E, A, D, G, are tuned in octaves, and then the higher 2, the B and the E, are tuned in unison. And so a high-string guitar is like you're only using that top string from each course. I'll give you an example. A regular guitar. A high-strung guitar. So to hear it in the instrument with 12-string mode off, and with 12-string mode on. And then like all the other instruments, there's an ADSR, there's different ranges for the pitch bend up and down, so you don't have to fiddle for the note in between the notes. You can just set the interval to exactly what you want. You can set the swarm range from anything from nothing up into an octave up and down. I like to go with kind of the extremes. I'll go to 2 or 1 semitone if I want something that sounds kind of tonal but can feel detuned. Or I'll go all the way up to 11, I can get a huge bend. And then you've got a vibrato control where each individual layer of every instrument has its own vibrato that goes at its own speed and its own amount. And like a lot of instruments, this sounds really good tuned down an octave or even 2 octaves. That was more than 2 octaves, huh? Oh, those of you out there with perfect pitch are probably mad at me. So that's it, that's the Swarmitar. I will put a link in the description to download it for yourself. It's totally free. You only need Kontakt 5.6.8. You need the full version, unfortunately. I'd also recommend that you check out the Swarmitar, which I made first, which is made out of electric guitars, or the swarminet made out of clarinets. And there's more of these coming. There's more swarms, and there's also some other instruments that I've been playing around with that I think should be pretty cool. So if you want to know when that happens, you can subscribe to the channel or click the bell to get a notification next time I post a video. Both of those things are free. And a thumbs up if you like the video. Feel free to send it to a friend who you think might like a acoustic swarmitar. And if you have any ideas for other things that could swarm well, or really anything else, just let me know. I'm always open to suggestions. My original plan was to use the EBow like I did with the Swarmitar, but I quickly learned that that was a pretty bad idea. It didn't really work on some of the instruments, and the ones that it did, it really sucked out all the character of them and everything that made them unique, and just basically sounded like a sine wave. So I got to experimenting. A violin bow wouldn't really work because without a curved bridge, there's no way to isolate all of those inner strings. So I went down to my local Amazon and I picked up some horsehair for a violin bow, expecting that that would be the next best thing. I could thread it through the strings, but it frayed pretty easily and got kind of messy. And then you actually, if you don't have it perfectly lined up, you hear all the different hairs moving around as you're bowing it. It just doesn't sound great. So I looked to see what people use in like prepared piano performances where they need it to be robust and repeatable. And it turns out they use fishing line. So I went back down to Amazon, picked up some fishing line, and this actually works pretty well. And the nice thing is that we're not constrained by the length of a horse's tail, so we can go as long as we want, and that'll give us longer notes. So into Logic, I created another template for this, kind of like what I did with the Swarmitar, but it's a little different. I went through and I mapped out what notes I wanted to sample from every instrument and then put them all in markers on this big long line, 3 passes of each one. So like the Swarmitar, I want 5 layers of each instrument again, so you can get the root note and then 2 intervals up and 2 intervals down. Since there are 6 instruments here, instead of it being a 2-octave spread in whole steps, it's going to be in half steps. So it'll be this really cool cluster, especially when the swarm is set to less than an octave. So I made markers for each note on each of the different instruments, and I made marker sets for the specific instruments, so you only see the notes that I'm actually going to record for that one. Okay, so now I'll shut up and I'll just record. I honestly have no idea if that was anything good at all, but we'll find out. Okay, so editing. This is going to be a much bigger project than the other two because a lot of these recordings just kind of suck. Not that they're beyond repair, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get them there. There's a lot of weird resonance in the notes that I couldn't control while I was bowing them. It's going to have to be denoised. There were a lot of cars and trucks going by, and I'm right off a busy street, so even late at night, there's always helicopters and drag racers and just loud cars and trucks going by. So I think my first step on this will be denoising. So that means I at least have to go through the samples and just make sure that I have 3 recordings of each note from each instrument. Here's an example of what we're working with all the weird resonances. I think we can clean this up, but it'll be a bit of a task. And those noises we're gonna have to edit around too. You can hear a truck going by on this one. Okay, now that everything's consolidated and cleaned up a little bit, we can bring it into RX for denoising. Now I'm going to go through and get rid of all the weird resonances. I'll start with the banjo to give you a good idea of what kind of sounds I'm talking about. Let's listen to this part for instance. Listen to it with and without. So that's a lot more of the frequencies that we want. I don't want to do too much to it. I just want to get rid of all the really bad stuff. Unfortunately, this isn't a set it and forget it kind of a thing. This is something I'll have to do for every note or every set of notes and then bounce them out separately. Here's another example. Okay, now that we got all the weird resonances out of it, I think the best plan of action would be to just pick and choose sections that we're going to use as our samples and get rid of all the in-between stuff. Then we can tune them, and then after they're all tuned, then we can start chopping them up and making loops. And we can be pretty sloppy with this because the real editing is coming later. Okay, so these are basic samples. I'll consolidate these and bring them into Melodyne. I won't make you watch me do it on all the instruments, but it's safe to say it'll be exactly the same. Now I can go back to Logic and bring in this tuned file. I feel like I'm going to say this at every step of the way, but now the tough part begins. It's time to edit all these samples and make them all loop. So I go through how I approach the looping in the Swarmitar video, which I'll link up here. Basically, what I'm going to do is, I'll do this quick and dirty right here, is I'll take each one of these samples, I'll just chop them somewhere in the middle, and that'll actually be the starting point of my sample. Flip them around, so that way I know that this point and this point are contiguous. They should flow one into the other without any click. So I'll just throw a quick crossfade on here. This way I can also dial in the crossfade exactly how I want it here instead of having to do it on the Kontakt side. This isn't going to sound great, but the thing to listen to is the transition between here and here. It should be seamless. So there we go. So I'm just going to go through and do that for every sample for all the instruments, and it'll be a lot of fun. Okay, now that those are all looped and consolidated, I can name them all and start exporting them. I want to make sure that it's 24-bit. I definitely don't want the audio tail because I want to make sure that it loops. And then I want to turn normalizing off. So here's our first set of samples here. They're all organized by group and then by note name. And we'll just do that for all the other layers. It's done. That took a long time. I'm glad that we went through all those. I'm really excited to put it into Kontakt and hear what it sounds like, because honestly, right now I have no idea. I hope it all works together well. I know that there's some leveling that we'll have to do to get every part to fit together well, but so far the individual samples sound pretty cool. Can you tell I was worried? So let's get these samples into Kontakt and hear what they sound like. This is actually pretty exciting. Okay, so everything is exported. We've got all of our samples here, and now we can start pulling them into Kontakt. The first thing I'm going to do is open up the Swarmitar. I'm going to use that as a template. Absolute first thing is to resave it, so I know that I'm not going to mess anything up. So I'll go up to this, save edited instrument as, I'll call it the ACOUSTIC SWARMITAR. swarmitar. Patch only, I don't want any of these swarmitar samples. And then I can wipe out all these samples because I don't want any of them. And then we're left with all of these groups that we can then rename and repurpose for the acoustic swarmitar. Now I'm going to skip the reverse groups for now and just make 3 groups for every instrument. I find it easier to do that after the fact, after we've already imported the samples and looped them and gotten everything into shape, rather than having to do it twice with the forwards group and the reverse group. Now we've got our 18 forwards groups here. I'm going to end up making another set of these Fender high-strung guitars too. That way we can easily switch between them playing at their normal pitch and the bottom 4 strings playing an octave up like you'd have on a 12-string guitar. So everything's in here. I can just drag every single sample in. So A swarmitar, we'll ignore that. Banjo 01 will be the group name. 60 will be set to single key. Hit apply. This will take a second. And now we have all of our samples, but there's going to be a problem. They're all playing at the wrong pitches. So what we have to do is select all of them, go to Batch Tools, and then move root key to center. That means that every note will actually play the note that it's supposed to. Next we can go group by group, selected groups only, and I'm going to drag all these samples down. I too like to just tune everything down rather than up and down. I wish there were a button for it, but unfortunately there is not. All right, now everything's mapped, everything's on the right keys. Really gives me some Joker vibes. This is cool. Next thing to do will be to loop all the samples. This will be pretty time intensive, but it's not that bad. The way I like to do this is selected groups only, so you're only seeing the group that you're in. Make sure select zone via MIDI is there. And you can close the group editor because it's already here. Scroll down a little bit so you can get to this sample loop and just press a sample from every key. And then you have to do that for every single layer. See if we see any white. Okay, so now everything should loop. Everything's in place. Now I think is the time to make the reverse groups. Then we can adjust the LFOs a little bit on these since they're duplicated from other groups. Now I'm going to reorder the groups. I wish there were an easy way to just drag and drop, but there isn't. So what I like to do is just duplicate all the groups in the order that I want them and then delete all the original groups. So now we should see starting here, all the groups are in the perfect order. So that means I can go delete all of these groups, leaving me with the right groups in the right order. And then I'll just label these as 12 string. Okay. So now that we have everything in place and all the samples are playing in the right pitches and they're all in their right groups and they're reversed where they need to be reversed and they're all looped, now let's go into the script and we can start changing the GUI and adjusting for all the differences. Well, now it's time for our weekly segment, Question Time, because I got one question from one person. So frankly, Talieson says, you should show us how to put the wallpaper and mainly the icon on the Kontakt instrument. I was waiting for this. Okay, so that's what I'll do. You can see it's these 4 lines right here, basically. So because we're getting into that point of this one, we're about to change the wallpaper. Let's just do a test. First thing you're going to have to do is make a wallpaper. In Kontakt 5, up to Kontakt 5, it's always 632 pixels wide, and it can be up to 540 pixels tall. Here's the one for the acoustic swarmitar. And if you do a little get info, you can see it's 632 wide because I'm still working on Kontakt 5. I think you can go up to 1,000 on Kontakt 6. And then it's 519 pixels tall. And for the icon has to be exactly 35 by 35. and that shows right here. I'm not going to go into Sublime Text for this. I'll just do it right in the script editor because it's very easy. It's only a few lines. Every script has to start with this on init. It's the initializing script. Just as a disclaimer, I have no idea what I'm talking about with this. I figure it out as I go along. I read the book, read the manual, Google a whole bunch of stuff, check out VI control, see what Evil Dragon has to say about these things. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. I am absolutely not an expert at scripting or any computer language at all. But I know how to make a wallpaper and an icon, so I guess I'm an expert in that. Okay, so every script has to start with an init callback. It looks like this. So everything that comes in between the on init and the end on is what happens when you load up the instrument and it connects to your audio engine. Sometimes if you load something up in V Pro but it's not connecting, this part won't be all set up yet, and that's why everything looks totally jumbled. I'm going to skip a step here just to show a concept, but the first thing that we're going to do is set the UI height. We're going to set it in pixels, and we'll use this again. It's 519 pixels tall. You'd think that you put 519 here, but you'd be wrong. You actually have to subtract 68, which is the size of this header here. These pixels only refer to what's under this line. So in that case, I've already done the math here. It's 451. 519 minus 68. When I click apply, you'll see it's already bigger. We'll go back here. Oh, it doesn't look any different. Well, that's because we didn't enable performance view. So that's a step I skipped. You want to do make perf view, and what that'll do is that'll apply this script slot to the front of the instrument here. So now it's the right size. This should fit right on it. The next step is to add the wallpaper. So we do that by typing this, set control parameter, str for string, and then Sublime Text will fill in some of the symbols that go in front of these variables, but since we're putting it in here by ourselves, we'll have to do that manually. So you just have to put a $sign in between these things. So instrument wallpaper ID control parameter picture, and then in quotes, you just put the exact name of the file. So this is a swarmitar. You don't have to put the file extension, the PNG or anything. That's all you're going to need. So now we'll do the same thing for the icon. Set control pair string ID, and I forgot the $sign on the other one. Control pair picture, and we've got, I think it's called AS icon 3. And that's it. When we hit apply, it's not going to work because we don't actually have anything there. And because I didn't close this parenthesis, it'll give us an error down here, wallpaper not found or not loadable. So what we're going to have to do here is go into instrument options, and we need some place to put our pictures that Kontakt will recognize. By the way, you can put a wallpaper right in here and it will work, but there may be a reason why you don't want to load it in there. Like for instance, if you want pages to your script, you want the background to be able to change to something else to reflect a different page with different settings in it. First, let's just save this instrument as wallpaper test, and we can save it just on the desktop for now. Now we can go into instrument options, create a resource container, and we want it right here next to the NKI in the samples folder. So we'll call this wallpaper test. What it'll do is it'll create a set of folders for us where we can put all of the things that we want the script to reference. In this resources folder, we'll have a pictures folder, and then in here we can drag, for instance, this wallpaper, and we also need that text file. Have I talked about this? I don't remember. But each picture file that you use for any of these, any knob, fader, wallpaper, anything, needs a corresponding text file, and it has to look exactly like this with no variations except for some of these answers. The only one I really change is the number of animations, which will be the number of states that a knob has, if it has like 128 values, or a button that has 6 modes for on and off and mouse overs and stuff like that. So it's usually 0 for something fixed like a wallpaper. Let's use this one, call it a swarmitar. And then we'll also get that icon file, which is exactly 33 by 33. And once these are in here, Kontakt should be able to see them. And look, it's already there. If we apply the script and then close the wrench, it's all in there. So that ends this wonderful segment that is question time with our one question from Frankly. Frankly, I hope that answered your question. I'm definitely going to go more in depth with this in a different video, and we can go through the whole script of how to build this GUI and especially how to create the swarm so you can do it yourself. It's only 300 something lines of code. It's very short script, 361. It looks intimidating, but it's not that bad. So back to the acoustic swarmitar. We know right away that there's something we need to change here, and that will be make it the A swarmitar. So now we need to create a new resource container for this, call it the PKA swarmitar. It did find a resource container that has 13 picture files and a script. Do I want to save it? Heck yes I do. Now it's not seeing these 3 guitar pictures because I got rid of them, so we can easily fix that. So now I'm just going to go through and change the swarm ranges for each instrument, add in all the pictures, and get everything going. So I think that's working really well. I've got all the faders and knobs and all the instrument select buttons working. You've already seen all this stuff in the beginning of the video, but just as a quick recap, we've got the acoustic guitar, the high strung, which we can turn into a 12 string, the banjo, the mandolin, the Marxophone, and the dulcimer. And then, of course, it swarms. So if you want to check it out, I will put a link down in the description to download it. It's totally free. You can also check out the Swarmitar and the Swarminet. Both links are down there as well. I'm definitely going to make more of these, so if you would like, you could hit the thumbs up button. I'd really appreciate that. Or subscribe to the channel, and then you could ding the little bell if you want a notification the next time I put out another video, which most likely will have another free instrument like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Or you will see me next time.